All right. It's August 28th, 2024. I have the pleasure of having Phil Torres, India Company, 3rd Battalion, 26 Marines with me. Phil, what is your full name?
Phil is my nickname. My first name is Felipe, which is Spanish for Philip. Phil Torres.
And Phil, when and where were you born?
I was born in Puerto Rico on July 13, 1949.
So, when did your family immigrate to the United States?
Well, um, when I was born, my I was left to be raised by my maternal grandmother for the first 11 years, and then after when I was 11 years old, I joined everyone in New York City, in the
Wow.
Bronx of New York City.
So, what was that like growing up in Puerto Rico in that time period from what you remember?
Well, it was fun, but I had another protective grandmother who would not even put me in school because I may get hurt. So I went to school late. I went to school. I was over 9 years old when I went to first grade.
Wow.
It,
Now,
I had a very loving experience. We didn't have any material things. We didn't have any money. We had a one room house, but we had everything we needed.
well, and with that, thinking about what you grew up with and or I guess what you didn't grow up with, and when you finally get to New York and the Bronx, what is it like transitioning from Puerto Rico to one of the busiest cities in the world?
Well, it was uh, it was a course in 100% immersion into the school system in the Bronx. Uh, Not being able to speak a word of English initially or Spanish, and then within the year, uh, having learned enough to win the school spelling bee,
No kidding.
the entire school spelling bee. I started in the fourth grade, so at the end of the fourth grade, I won the entire school spelling bee, including fifth and sixth graders.
Wow. So what did that feel like to win that achievement early on in your childhood in the United States?
Well, I thought that I could do it. I knew that I could do it, and I did it. It was uh, the back then. It was so. The theme was assimilate, not acculturate. So everybody wanted to immerse, learn how to speak English, read, write, converse, uh, and get adjusted so that you had the best shot at success.
Well, and through that too, and thinking about the fact that you were here for a year and won your school spelling bee, in many ways, especially for my students, that speaks volumes of your work ethic as an educator and wanting to learn and wanting to be a part of the culture of the school system around you.
Absolutely.
Now, in this time period, being in the Bronx and early on, were you fascinated by any sports or hobbies in those early teenage years living in the Bronx?
Absolutely was. Well, first off, the South Bronx, like East LA and South Chicago, are not the places to raise a family. Okay, normally, it was tough. There were gangs. We were three brothers and a younger sister. I was the youngest of the three brothers. We protected each other, uh, looked out after each other. But yes, I was an athlete. I was participating in bicycle races. Would go down every Saturday and Sunday to Central Park with the club. Take uh, do training runs around Central Park, coming out to a 25-mile training run at speed, and then go do some 100-mile races later. And then during the afternoon, ride the bike to Queens, New York, another 12, 15 miles, and then practice on the track. Uh, at Central Park, we practice road racing. At a Casino Park in Queens, we practice track racing. So, and then I will go from there and ride the bike home. So I would spend the whole Saturday or the whole Sunday on the bike.
Well, in many ways, that's a childhood that I feel that kids these days, most kids these days, don't have any connection to. Um, and I find it phenomenal that you were able to have that much energy and time to ride bikes and have a passion for that. That's incredible.
Well, that was one of my passions. I was also I also picked up playing handball and competed in handball games. The Bronx is a rough spot, so self-defense was uh, needed. I started the, the martial arts at the age of 12, 1 year after I got to New York, and stay with the martial arts. And now I've been with the martial arts for 63 years.
Well, we've talked a little bit about that too in our Facebook chats with your experience in the martial arts and your success. But even then, speaking of the Bronx and within the self-defense, I guess a lot of your hobbies kept you out of the streets and out a lot of the gang life and gang activities simply because you were busy and your family was also trying to keep you out of that as well, I assume.
Because I was busy 7 days a week, literally 7 days a week. I would come home every day. I would uh, do a little bit of homework, get on the bike, go do several miles of fast work uh, in the Bronx, uh, come back and go to work. I started working when I was 12 at an interior decorator store. So I would ride the bike, come back, go to work for about 4 hours. And sometimes I would go from directly, a couple of times a week, I would go directly from work, take the train, go to the karate school, and train for 2 hours. So that by the time I got home on the average day of the week, it was after 10, and I had a plate of food waiting for me on the stove, on top of the stove, and the lights were out. So I ate in the dark.
Wow. Just thinking about the fact that you're working martial arts, training, riding bikes for yourself, and being able to do and excel in school with all of that going on, it speaks volumes of your work ethic. But in many ways, it speaks of a bygone era with how you're able to juggle so many activities and hobbies and still find room for your own enjoyment.
It was a different time. People then were not sidelined by all the gadgets that we have today.
Amen to that. Well, and two, I think about the fact of how much bike riding that you got to do, and how the fact that you literally got to explore the city of New York and experience life and experience what the city had to offer, and then see it grow. And looking back, that has to be a pretty fond memory for the most part.
Yes, it was participating in all of the activities, doing well, meeting new friends, going to different places around the city, whether it's Manhattan for the training at Central Park, and then having lunch or dinner with friends. I was I was a kid. They were mostly adults, but I was one of them, and I felt like I belonged there. I was, whether I was 14, 15, 16, they treated me as one of them, not as a kid.
Well, and two, and working at such a young age and being a part of your family and your older brothers and sisters, or your younger sister, who I assume were also working, what were your parents doing?
Well, it was a single parent home. My mother, uh, she worked in the fashion district in Manhattan. Uh, so she spent a lot of time at work, and we spent a lot of time taking care of each other.
Well, and with that, that creates a bond for a family in many ways, especially with your brothers and your younger sister, that I have to assume is pretty unbreakable.
It was a good bond.
Now, in
We
your
we we all had different activities, but we were still close, and we became closer later, especially after joining the military. Uh, we didn't all go into the Marine Corps at the same time. Only I went into the Marine Corps, and my two older brothers went into the oldest one went into the Air Force. The next oldest one went into the Army. But later on, I got to convince them to join the Marine Corps.
well, and I can't wait till we get to that part, especially for how you convince them. But as you go through high school and you're
I didn't, I
educate,
didn't, I didn't really go through high school. I
really.
I dropped out of the ninth grade to join the Marine Corps on my 17th birthday.
So, as the Vietnam War's happening, I assume you start to hear about it in itself. You know that there's going to be a draft. Why the Marine Corps?
The Marine Corps, well, being an athlete, competing in martial arts tournaments, competing in bicycle races, competing in running, competing in handball. Being an athlete, I wanted the ultimate challenge, something that would challenge me, take me to my limits, and perhaps beyond. And I felt that the Marine Corps was the only branch of service that would provide me that opportunity. And I feel that I was right.
So, when you enlist, you go back home. Did you tell your mother that you enlisted in the Marines?
Well, at 17, you need your mother's permission to sign the contract. So my my in 1966, my oldest brother joined the Air Force. He was old enough; he didn't need my mother's permission. He had graduated high school. He graduated high school. My second oldest brother, uh, he was over 18. He didn't need my mother's permission. I had just turned 17, and on my 17th birthday, I convinced her that I also wanted to join the military. So on my 17th birthday, she had to go with me to the recruiting office to sign for me.
Now, for your mother to make that decision and to sign for you in itself, did she try to talk you out of it of the Marine Corps?
Well, since my two other brothers had just joined the previous 2 months, one in June, one in July, I went in August. She really did not try to talk me out of it, but I was always under the impression that she thought the Marine Corps was more that I was joining the Merchant Marines. And I was not about to correct her. So
Well,
off I went,
and off you go. So, did you arrive in Paris Island in August or was it September?
August.
And arriving in Paris Island in August, what is your impression and your interaction with Paris Island? Is it hot?
It's very hot, very hot and full of mosquitoes. And you can't touch them, and you can't kill them. They need to be there, so they need to be preserved for the next and the next and the next platoon. You can't slap them off. You gotta let them have their meal.
So that's part of the initiation at Paris Island is
That's
leaving the
all
mosquitoes.
that's all part of being a Marine at Paris Island. That's all part of the discipline and the focus and sometimes the pain.
So for you, what was those first couple of days at Paris Island like as you're being inducted into the Marine Corps in itself and into the environment of the Marines?
Um, it was scary. It was exciting. Um, it was chaotic to some degree. Nobody knew what to expect or when. Uh, it was all about changing a person from being a regular civilian into a warfighter. So the indoctrination of becoming a Marine. The Marine Corps, when you join the Marine Corps, the whole history of the Marine Corps, you spend a lot of time learning about what happened from day one in the Marine Corps in 1775. But the whole history of the Marine Corps is taught to you and placed on your shoulders. So now you got to carry that weight with you wherever you go, and not let them down, not let any of your previous generations down. So that's something that where the Marine Corps does it differently. It puts the entire history of the Marine Corps, the last 248 years, on your shoulders, and then you better not screw it up.
Well, and through that too, Phil, standing in the footsteps or the shadows of the giants that came before you, for many of the Marines of the period, a lot of their fathers or uncles were Marines in World War II or Korea, and names that still echo in Marine Corps history outside of course, World War One with Bellawood. But you have Guadalcanal, you have Peleliu, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Chosin. And now, for many of you young Marines, it's a chance to etch your name into some of the annals of Marine Corps history.
Absolutely.
Now, with that being said, and feeling that history, but at the same time, I know that the Marine Corps also builds you as a Marine and what it means to be a Marine in itself. So, how did they start breaking you down as an individual and start building you up as a Marine?
Well, of course, the first thing I do is you're going to have a shaved head. And a lot of people identify with their hair and being used to it. And once that's taken off, a part of your personality just hit the floor. And so you become more susceptible to being properly indoctrinated into this biggest rifle club in the world.
Well, and with that too, you've got the shaved head, everyone starts looking the same. Do the drill instructors treat all of you the same?
Pretty much, pretty much. They're hard. They'll take everything up to the line, being careful not to cross the line. Occasionally, you have somebody that gets a little more anxious than others and may cross the line, but that was the exception. That wasn't the rule. But it's about pushing you. None of us know how far we can go or how powerful we can really be unless we have been tested to go there. And the Marine Corps will push you and test your physical and mental limits, whether it's marching or running or doing lots of exercises, moving quickly from one place to another, so that your time is not your own. Every minute of every hour for the 24 hours, you belong to the Marine Corps. Uh, so you are completely controlled. And it's about taking that rookie person and having them go beyond anything they've ever done. And then once you get to accomplish something you never done or go as far as you've ever had, then you begin to build a sense of confidence in yourself. I didn't know I can do that, but yes, I can. Or going up the ropes 10 times, or running, coming back, hitting the obstacle course, and then hitting something else. You will get pushed to your physical and mental limits. Uh, you get to see where you're at, you get to see where everybody's at, and then everybody's built forward from there.
Well, and from what I've understood talking to a lot of Vietnam era Marines in itself, a lot of the drill instructors as well, they tear you down at first. However,
Yes,
as boot camp continues, they start instilling confidence in you of what it's going to take and what it means to be a United States Marine.
absolutely. And that's where the history of the Marine Corps is inculcated into you. It's drilled into your brain every single day. This is what Marines have done, and this is what Marines will continue to do. Uh, and much of the confidence building is through the exercises and the activities you do and the obstacle courses you got to run that allow you to see that you can go much farther than you thought you could, that you're not going to quit what you thought what you would have quit a year ago or a month ago.
Well, and through that, especially speaking of your DIs and the impact they had, do you recall if any of your drill instructors had combat experience in Vietnam or Korea?
All of my drill instructors had Vietnam experience, to my knowledge. I don't think any of them had Korean experience. So yeah, they all had been to Vietnam.
Well, and with the drill instructors having the experience of being in Vietnam in itself, did they share any of their experiences with you towards the end of boot camp to kind of give you an idea of what you might be getting into in the future?
Yes, as time went on, and we got closer to graduation, and they would open up more about what they went through and how to prepare for that.
Did you find any of the advice that they gave, and did you also find that boot camp prepared you for what you went through in combat?
Boot camp prepared me to be a basic Marine. After boot camp, then you go off to the School of Infantry, for example, if you're in the infantry, and then you learn about weapons and tactics and other things. So boot camp is the first place that begins the building process, gets you to be a disciplined basic Marine, and then you go off to the school of your military occupational specialty to learn exactly what it is that you're going to be doing.
Well, and I know that prior to graduation for boot camp and even in boot camp in itself, you eventually have to learn the rifle that you are assigned to. You've got to memorize the serial numbers, you've got to know how to take it apart and put it back together. So in 1966, when you were in boot camp, what type of rifle were you assigned?
The M14.
Do you remember the serial number from that M14 by chance?
I don't recall because I had we had more than one for whatever reason was exchanged. I do not remember the rifle number. I remember my serial number, but not the rifle number.
Well, and thinking about the M14, and just one of my favorite questions to ask Vietnam Marines, what was your opinion of the M14?
We liked it. We thought it was a fantastic rifle. Uh, we used it for qualification. Marine Corps qualification is different than the other services. Some of the other services qualify with a rifle at 25 yards. Marine Corps qualifies with a rifle every year up to 500 yards. So it's different. The marksmanship emphasis and what you go through and what you learn is very much different than some of the other services.
Well, and speaking of the qualifications and speaking of boot camp in itself and the distances, when it came to qualification day, how did you shoot that day?
I did not do as well as I wanted to. A handful did not do as well as what they wanted to. But then I took that as a personal mission set, so that when I went to my first duty station and beyond, I promised myself I will qualify as expert during the remaining time in the Marine Corps. And when I got out 34, going on 34 and a half years later, I kept my promise.
Outstanding. That's an incredible goal that you set for yourself. And an aspect that the Marine Corps teaches you is to set goals and to achieve them and to learn from your mistakes.
Absolutely. That's the only way we grow. But the because that's where the interest in marksmanship started. But even today, every other weekend, I'm competing in some form of competition, shooting competition now. So this coming weekend, I'll be in a shooting competition. Last week, I had a dropout of competing at the national IDPA championship in Talladega. I was scheduled to go. I couldn't make it because I had a conflict. So last week I would have been at the national shooting IDPA shooting championship, but I wasn't able to make it. So I'm still heavily involved, and I teach people marksmanship. I teach people how to tactical action shooting marksmanship. I teach people about firearm safety. I do that every week.
Well, it's incredible to think that being that it's August 2024 right now, that 58 years ago, these roots were implanted in you just by enlisting in the Marine Corps and what you experienced in boot camp.
Well, yes, but let me take it one step further. In early 1966, I had a choice to make. Uh, in order to be truly tested, because I was also competing in the martial arts at that time already. But I, I said to myself, well, I can join the Marine Corps or I can go to Japan for further martial arts studies, like some of my friends had gone to Japan. Some of my friends that I competed with or I associated with in the martial arts went to Okinawa and mainland Japan to study, to further the study and come back as teachers. So I had a choice between those two. So I had a kind of a mental coin toss, and the Marine Corps won. And by the Marine Corps winning, I was able to do both of my passions. One was being a Marine, and the Marine Corps sent me. Okinawa is the birthplace of karate, so I spent a bit of time in Okinawa, and I got to study with the grandmasters, and until such time as I became a grandmaster myself.
Well, it's just incredible to think about the hobbies that you had at such a young age and the impact it's had on you with your time in the Marine Corps and afterwards, and the people that you've got to meet along the way. I mean, that's a phenomenal story that needs to be a book in its own.
You know, you're probably the 1,000 plus person that told me that I've assisted people with writing books. I've wrote chapters for other people, etc. But I haven't written my own yet.
Well, hopefully here in the future we can start seeing some chapters and books by Phil Torres about your remarkable life.
I uh, I hope so too. And I can honestly say, and I don't think everyone can say this. I can honestly say that I live my dream career. And not everyone can say they get up every morning, look forward to going to work in that uniform, and love the interaction with the few or the many, uh, and do that for 34 plus years.
Well,
And I did.
in many ways, and the credit to the Marine Corps, the opportunities were presented to you, and you took advantage of those opportunities, and you pursued them, and you continued achieving and pursuing those dreams. And look at you today.
That is exactly correct. You're gonna have unlimited opportunities, but it does no good if you don't go through the door. So I chose to go through the door in each of those opportunities, especially going when I went from being enlisted to being a commissioned officer.
Well, and we'll eventually get to that, but I personally love Mustang Marines simply for the fact of the skills and the knowledge that you learn as enlisted Marines and how you're able to transition that to your viewpoint as an officer. And so when we get to that point, perhaps in another interview or two down the timeline, that's going to be phenomenal. However, I want to start with that first door of graduation, of you officially becoming a United States Marine. What was your emotion like that day on graduation day?
A lot of confidence, a lot of pride, a lot of laughter with my uh, friends, the other Marines, uh, a great personal achievement in life, the beginning of the beginning.
Now, did any of your family come watch you graduate that day at Paris Island?
No, my mother was not able to make it, and uh, my brothers were already stationed. No, yeah, okay. They had finished school. One went to Japan, and I don't remember where the other one went to.
Well, and at that point for graduation day, you knew that your MOS was going to be 0311, correct?
Correct.
And so how long did you have to report to the School of the Infantry?
Um, we reported to the School of Infantry right away before going on leave, and then went on leave after the School of Infantry at Camp Geiger.
Well, and I was about to ask, at that time period, what was the length of School of Infantry for Camp Geiger?
It may have uh, it may have been 6 weeks. Don't quote me. Don't quote me on that. It was probably half the length as boot camp.
So, as a newly I want to say graduated Marine, go into the School of the Infantry. Your confidence is high in itself, and now for the next several weeks, you're going to be taught what it means to fit into a rifle squad and in a rifle platoon as a Marine rifleman. So, what are you being taught in the School of the Infantry?
Um, Marksmanship, different weapons, uh, tactics, uh, history, more history about combat. So everything that a basic Marine needs to know about feeling comfortable about being a Marine.
And through a lot of this training that you go through, and I know for a lot of the Marines who went through Camp Geiger, they mentioned that some of their favorite days were the weapons days, where you got to experience the different firepower that you could see within a Marine rifle squad and in a platoon. What kind of weapons do you recall that you trained on at Camp Geiger?
Well, at Camp Geiger, we didn't have the M14. We had the M1 Garand. So we took a step back, and I enjoyed it, and I was good with it, and getting to the M60 machine gun or the M2 HB 50 cal. Uh, we didn't have the Mark 19 at that time, but we had the M79 grenade launcher, the blooper, and the various other weaponry, being exposed to the various other weaponry that the Marine Corps has at that time.
Well, and like any young teenager or Marine in their early 20s, what was your favorite weapon that you got to handle there at Camp Geiger?
My favorite weapon early on was my 1911 45 ACP.
And of all the weapons you handled, why that one specifically?
It was special. It had a history, a long history. Uh, it worked well. Uh, it put the enemy down when you needed to put the enemy down. And I got to specifically use the 1911 in Vietnam.
Well, and as the Marine Corps prepares you for going to Vietnam, when you were at Camp Geiger, did you go through any mock villages or mock setups of rice paddies to prepare you for some of the terrain you might encounter?
Yes, but not at the School of Infantry. Before we went to Vietnam, we went through a staging battalion at Camp Pendleton, and we were there for I don't know several weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and that's where we went through the mock-ups of what life was going to be like in in Vietnam. We went to the villages, the rice paddies, the booby traps, etc. Staying off the trails. That was all covered as part of staging battalion, which is a precursor to going to Vietnam.
Well, and prior to getting to the staging battalion as well, did you have some at least leave time to spend time with your mother and your younger sister before eventually heading out that way?
Yes, I think it took about 20, 25 days to spend in New York with the family and then head off. I got my orders in 67, late 67, went on leave, reported to December 67, went on leave, reported to staging battalion sometime during January, spent about 3 to 4 weeks in staging battalion, and then off to Vietnam, got there early February.
And so for
And
you, go ahead, Phil, sorry.
early February of 68.
Well, and by that point in itself, Ted of 1968 is kicked off, and I'm sure that you were fully aware of that, just what was in the news.
Correct. I was not only had Ted kicked off a couple of weeks before I got there, a few weeks before I got there, because kicked off like January 21st. I got there February. I got to Khe Sanh. Well, I got to Vietnam February 11th, and as soon as I got to Da Nang, Vietnam, receiving, uh, I was told that I was going to Khe Sanh at that time. We had all read stories about Khe Sanh. We were scared. We were told how we were going to go uh, into the Khe Sanh base, and how some of us were going to be up on the hills of Khe Sanh protecting Khe Sanh. And that's when the fear factor kind of began to creep in, and all of us that were going north to Khe Sanh.
Well, and I know too that a lot of people, when they think of Khe Sanh, they think of the siege. However, especially being that you were with the 26th Marines, the 26th Marines fought pretty heavily over the hills around Khe Sanh in the hill fights in 1967.
That's correct. And we had all read that, we all knew that, it has been told to us. It was all covered, so that when you get into Da Nang and you tell, well, you're going to be on the next helicopter to Khe Sanh, you just a sense of fear that goes through you first before anything else goes through you.
Well, and with that too, thinking about when you first arrive in country, I mean, what's your first impression of Vietnam, first of all, before you even find out you're going to Khe Sanh?
Uh, it was somewhat chaotic. There's a lot going on, even in Da Nang, uh, having to get us moving us to where the rear of the battalion was, getting all the gear. It was very hectic, fast paced, while being scared and accepting it.
Well, and when you get your orders for the 26 Marines and you know that you're going to report to Khe Sanh, and as you're on that flight out there, you've got the reality, I guess, setting in many ways that you're going into a combat zone, but not just in it, you're going into an incredibly hot combat zone where casualties are mounting.
Absolutely, especially just going in or coming out. Uh, I was told that the aircraft, the C-130, was at the landing strip, was not going to stop. It was going to be ramped down. It was going to be slowed down, ramped down, touchdown, and then back up. And somewhere in between, you better roll off because the aircraft could not afford to come to a complete stop. We had a lot of evidence on the side of the uh, landing strip of what happens to those aircraft that did not stop. So again, the scare factor was still pumping up. Uh, it's not going to stop. You got to roll off. It's going to slow down. You got to roll off. You got to get into the trench. You got to jump into the trench. Uh, so that was pretty scary and dramatic.
So, as you were coming into Khe Sanh on the downwind journey, was the base taking active artillery and mortar rounds at that time?
The base was taking active artillery and mortar rounds and mostly rockets, more so than anything else. The 122 millimeter rocket, 6 foot rockets, uh, during that time and every day. It was taking the rockets in every day, coming in from much farther away.
Well, and from your perspective too, as the plane touches down and you literally roll out of the back of the C-130, what's going on around you on the base? Is there, you've got chaos, you're trying to find a trench. What's it like from the eyes of Phil Torres?
There's a lot of chaos going on, but it's controlled chaos. It's not people not knowing what they're doing. It's just that there's a lot of running. You live in a trench, literally. You come out of the trench for particular duties, things you got to do, and then you get back in the trench. So there was just a lot of running, a lot of chaos, control chaos, uh, and just a lot of Marines doing the job, doing it well, uh, but at the same time being scared too.
Well, and for yourself, eventually you end up find out that your company assignment is India Company. And at
Correct.
this time, where was India Company located?
Hill 881 South.
And
That was the central hill.
being on Hill 881 South and knowing about the history of 881 South, especially in 1967, how did you
Yep.
get to 881 South?
But well, there was only one way to get to the hill, and that was by helicopter. The problem is that a lot of the helicopters got shot right out of the air coming in to the hill. So the attack helicopters had to come in, circle the hill, fire the weapons, and then the CH-46s will come in behind them and quickly land, get everybody to run out of the helo and jumping into the trenches. So it
So,
was extremely chaotic, but again, control chaos.
and in this environment of controlled chaos, and you're finally meeting your company, How would you describe the veterans of India Company, 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines that you're meeting for the first time? What do they look like?
Uh, there's not a whole lot of sanitation or shaving or hair cutting that goes on when that's not available to you. There was season. You can see it in the faces. They were glad you were there. Anytime more troops join them, they were happy that people join them. Um, they were smart. They were very knowledgeable about the weaponry that we had. We had a lot of weaponry up on the hill.
So, up on the hill in itself, what did India Company have in terms of an arsenal that was available to you at the time?
On the hill, we had multiple uh, M2s, 50 caliber machine guns. We had 106, we had four 106 recoilless rifles. Um, we had every every squad had a machine gun, had an M60 machine gun in front of them, and within the squad, even though the whole company was spread out around the entire perimeter in the trench. Uh, the M60 played a significant role. The M2s played a significant role. The 106 recoilless rifles. If we had word that the enemy was coming up from any one particular area, we would take all those four. We have four 106s. We put them all side by side. We get some Fluchet rounds, and we spent all night long having a party.
For for the people that might watch this and my students, what's a flechette round with a 106 and what does it do?
It's a small little dot, not so small. It's almost like firing a shotgun, a 12 gauge shotgun, with double aught bug, except now you firing this uh, maybe 3 inch, 2 to 3 inch diameter round uh, filled with little arrows, little metal arrows that may be about 1 inch long, all flying towards the enemy and doing significant damage.
Well, then, for those that might not, I guess, think tactically in itself, that a 106 flechette round against infantry in the open is devastating, especially if the spacey's poor in itself, but it's incredibly beneficial to you Marines on the hill.
Very beneficial. Like I said, if we had word that we had enemy coming from any one particular area, you're getting four 106s side by side, all firing at the same time and firing throughout the night. Uh, we uh, we took care of whatever was there.
Well, and for you so quickly, Phil, much like many Marines who arrive at Khe Sanh, especially after the siege in itself, you're thrust into the heart of combat. And that is the heart and soul of the Marine Corps is Marine Corps riflemen trained and prepared for combat. So what is your first true combat experience like from your perspective?
I remember the first night on 881. I was one of the chosen ones to go out on a listening post called normally called an LP listening post. 881, of course, had a trench that went around the entire hill. And there was another company up there. My company was also there on the saddle of 881. But we had about 6 different strands of concertina, or to be more specific, German tape wire that the enemy would have to go through, 6 different rows. Um, I remember going on a listening post for my first night, probably one of my scariest nights in my life, beyond the pale. And the listening post, it's two people going beyond, so maybe 50 yards beyond the wire. So now you are there on your own, and you've heard all these stories about 881 and Khe Sanh, and you everything begins to play in your head. I better stay awake. I better be ready. I have to be able to communicate. Had a radio to communicate with the lines. I may have to evacuate back up the hill, and I have to make sure that the lines know that I'm coming. So that was on night one.
Well, and thinking about this too, knowing the context of Khe Sanh and especially Hill 881 South, I mean, listening posts, LP duty at any point in the Vietnam War is definitely a nerve-wracking experience. However, in a situation like that, knowing that the base and surrounding area is under siege, that has to be a worst nightmare come true.
That was that was literally a nightmare, but it had to be done, and you had to stay focused, and you didn't have a choice.
Well, and that's where the Marine Corps training kicks in many ways of suppressing these fears in itself because you're relying on the Marines around you and they're relying on you, and you cannot have a wink link in that chain.
That is absolutely the most critical element. Yes,
Now, on the LP duty that night, and just in general at nighttime around Khe Sanh, were there be pop flares going off pretty frequently around the perimeter?
from time to time there would be. Uh, on that first night, some of the people back in the trenches heard movement close to us. And the next thing I know is that there are M26 hand grenades being tossed down the hill, landing not that far from us. And us, I think we had two people uh, trying to fit into a crater made by an artillery piece to make sure that we were covered, so that make sure we were covered from the shrapnel. So not only did I have to go out there in the first night, but in the first night we had movement around us, and the lines decided to deal with the movement by throwing grenades that were not too far from us.
Well, and outside of that terrifying experience of the fact that you've got friendly Marines rolling grenades down the hill in itself above you, what kind of visibility are we talking about on that first night in terms of what you can see in front of you?
Almost no visibility. It wasn't a moonlit night or anything. There was pure darkness. So all you had to do was go on sound. You couldn't see anything.
And with movement going on around you, and of course, grenades going off in itself within the nighttime, I mean, that's got to be a pretty nerve-wracking experience to know that if you've got grenades going off and the enemy is that close, that perhaps your LP is being in danger of being overrun.
That's correct. To be honest, I did not think I would make it back the first night. I was convinced I would not make it back the first night.
And with that first night too, on this LP duty, was there a radio out there with your listening post?
Yes, it was one of the EE8 radios. I'm pretty sure that's what they call it. It was a very simple radio, but yes,
And with that radio in itself, you've got a line of communication, but for folks to understand, if the NVA would have hit you in force that night, your LP would have been one of the first targeted points. And with the small team out there, the chances of survivability are slim to none.
Probably none, zero. Probably uh, it would have been 100%, in my opinion, that we would have been casualties.
And to give folks an idea here, just doing a little pre-research, and it's excellent time to bring this up. I wanted to show a photograph of Hill 881 South to give viewers an idea of the terrain that we're talking about.
Okay.
And so, looking at this terrain here, Phil, in itself, and thinking about the LP and how dark it was, the NVA were excellent, if I'm not mistaken, at least from what I've talked to with previous Marines, at moving at night and night ambushes and night tactics.
The MBA were very good at doing many things. Don't forget that NVA soldier may have been in combat, may have had 15, 20, 25 years of combat. And there were many of them with that kind of experience. You got you got 18, 19, 20-year olds who are going to max out at 13 months of combat and then maybe come back later. So you've got a very seasoned, very experienced, well trained, very disciplined, well trained soldier that you're fighting against. You have more arrows in your quiver uh, because we've got air that we can call on. We've got other supporting fires that we can call on. But you're fighting an enemy that has a lot more experience than you do.
Well, that, and just to touch on the NVA outside of their experience, they're also fighting on territory that is familiar. They are fighting, from their perspective, a cause to unite their war-torn country in itself. And they know that if you, Phil Torres, survive, that you go home in 13 months. However, home for them doesn't happen until, from their perspective, the war is either won or it's lost.
That's correct.
And so when we think about the tactics and the fighting for the NVA, I know that started in 1967, the NVA really tried to get as close as they could to any Army or Marine unit on the ground to limit the use of supporting arms. They figured that the closer you get, the more casualties you can cause, and the Americans don't bring in their supporting firepower. Because that's one of the key natures of Marine Corps firepower is the artillery, the air support that can be utilized at the drop of a dime.
That's correct.
And so, from your perspective, with your time at Khe Sanh, how much or how often did you have the supporting arms available to you via artillery and air support?
We had the supporting arms available to us 24/7, really, to some degree. We had aircraft. We had the B-52s that would come over the hills around us doing an arc light. An arc light is, I think, 25 B-52s all in line, all dropping at the same time. And that's quite a sight to see. And not only do you see it, but you feel it under your feet when all those bombs are dropping. And then the next day, you got a bunch of NBA soldiers coming up to your wire to surrender, and every single one of them has got busted eardrums and bleeding dry blood from the night. So
Well, and a lot of people don't know this, or at least those who haven't put in the effort time to research Khe Sanh, but you had more tonnage of bombs dropped during the siege of Khe Sanh that were dropped in the entirety of World War II. That was the nature of the fighting around the hill and the other hills in the area.
that's correct. And like I said, just one arc light will bring in hundreds of thousands of poundage uh, of bombs. You got 500 and 1,000 pound bombs all dropping at the same time from this multiple platforms above you.
Well, and then with that too, speaking of the siege, you've got the supporting arms in itself. You've got the B-52s, but at any given time, the NVA could launch an attack to try to overrun your hill of 881 South, and that has always got to be in the back of in the forefront of everyone's mind.
And it was every minute of every day. They could have gone up, and there was not enough ammo or guns on that hill to be able to stop them if they came in full force. And keeping in mind that in the total of Khe Sanh, we had about 5,000 troops, mostly Marines. Uh, the enemy had two divisions around Khe Sanh, doing at 360 degrees around Khe Sanh. We couldn't go anywhere for 77 days. We couldn't move. If we came out of the trench, that that coming out of the trench to somebody smoking a cigarette, there was an artillery round coming in. There was a mortar round coming in. There was a 51 caliber round coming in from one of their heavy duty machine guns. So just stepping out of the trench line for a second, um, we couldn't take our flat jackets off. We couldn't take our helmets off. It was a $25 fine if you got caught without your helmet at any time. So, uh, yeah,
Well, and thinking of just all the hell around you in itself, and for that experience in your introduction into Vietnam, and of course with India 326, a lot of the success of the Marines at Khe Sanh in itself, in many ways, goes to the individual Marine riflemen who did their jobs, the fire team leaders, the squad leaders, but also some of the officers, especially within 326. Now, if I'm not mistaken, your skipper at the time was Captain Dabney, correct?
that is correct. He and I, after Vietnam, later on, when I became an officer, he and I became close friends, uh, and we spent many hours talking about Khe Sanh. We spent many hours because at at different points in time, helicopters. The only way for us to get any food or water was external pallets on the CH-46 helicopters. There was no other way to get food to us. We couldn't move, and there was no other way. So uh, there were times when the helicopters could not make it to the hill, either too much fire and they had to turn around, or they had to release early, and the rations fell in enemy territory, uh, or they just did not release and went back to the Khe Sanh base. Um, so there were times when the cloud cover in the morning was the cloud cover was below the hill and the helicopters could not come in. So there were times when we went 5 or 6 or 7 days without getting resupply. By that time, we had literally run out of food, and we're going through the trash pits to see if we can pick up the old little cans of jam or peanut butter and jelly or whatever. Just going through the trash pit to pick up whatever we threw, whatever we didn't want when we got the rations, the sea rations. We throw some of the things away. 4 or 5 days later, you picking those back up and eating them.
Well, and thinking about that from your perspective, of course, Phil, what is it like to be that hungry, knowing that, of course, you're going to need a meal at some point, but you're willing to eat anything, even perhaps ham and lima beans?
Well, for one, I loved ham and lima beans, so that was not a problem for me. But going to the trash and finding those little cans of peanut butter and jelly and all that, and then someone offering you $50 for that little can, and you say, "Well, I need food. I don't need money. I can't use any money here in Vietnam." So going through that or arguing with each other as to who found it first or offering money. We went through that, but
Well, and
I never knew how I never knew how much ahead of us, how creative Captain Dabney was, for example. Uh, Before he had that command bunker built, he had rations, boxes of rations underneath all of that that would have sustained us for X amount of days or weeks. No one knew about that, okay, except him, period. So if he came to not eating for another couple of days, he would have broken those out. He had hundreds of cases beneath his command bunker. Uh, we talked about that, again, later on when we became close friends and we had chats about uh, our opinions and what happened in particular days, particular events. He was ahead of the game.
well, and as an officer to go ahead and literally be playing chess instead of checkers, which is a saying some people use, one that benefits your Marines down the line in itself. When that happens, where you've got that food shortage, if you plan and prepare that far ahead, you're taking care of your Marines, but it also lets your Marines know at the enlisted level that the skipper cares about them and that they're in good hands.
Well, Captain Dabney did care about everyone. A superhuman, a super Marine, a great American. Uh, he passed away maybe 12, 15 years ago. He was able to receive his Navy Cross like 50 years after Khe Sanh. He did a super job. He got selected for major while he was on the hill and then left the hill to become the training officer, the S3 officer for the battalion. And then later I met him when he was a colonel. Initially, he was a colonel, I was a captain. And then when we were both colonels, we got on the phone and just chatted away.
Now, with Captain Dabney setting this example, of course, as a skipper, and I'm sure that that definitely had an impact on you as an officer. Who was
Oh,
your
yeah.
platoon leader at the time?
Platoon leader up on the hill was Lieutenant Matthews. I think he was also a pastor. Uh, good infantry officer, very stern. Uh, People liked him. Good guy.
Well, and with your platoon leader there, and kind of breaking down the chain of command in itself, do you remember who the platoon sergeant was at the time on the hill?
We've had several platoon sergeants on the hill, including Sergeant Moses, for example. Uh, that's normally a staff sergeant's billet rank, but most of the time it was a fairly senior sergeant that may have filled that spot. Moses is the only name that I can remember right now. I don't recall that maybe one or two others.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken in itself too, with a lot of the reason for the turnover in the platoon sergeant is just due to the casualties or guys just rotating back home in such a short amount of time, but I assume it's more than likely the casualties that were happening.
That's correct. That's why I became a platoon sergeant as a corporal later after Khe Sanh.
Well, and with your time on the hill in itself, I mean, you're there in late February. You've got your first combat experience, your first night in itself, but it is utter hell happening around the perimeter, especially for the case on combat base. And I know that one of your sister companies in 126 in late February sent out a patrol that became known as the Ghost Patrol. Did you ever hear about that while you were on Hill 881 South?
I have I've heard about other units and what happened to the other units. I don't specifically remember what happened to 126.
Well, and even from your perspective within 326 and specifically India Company, did India start trying to push any patrols off of 881 South into the saddles?
We could not go out on patrols. We were surrounded 360. The only the only unit we interacted with physically was my company that was on the saddle of 881. We were up on the hill, but there was, and then going on one side, we had the saddle. My company was on the saddle.
And with that type of interaction and the aspect of being surrounded, at any given point during the siege, was ammo shortage a concern, especially for the fact of the intensity of the fighting as it picks up?
Something that we thought about, but we never really did run out of ammo at any one point.
Well, and from your perspective, Phil, if you feel okay with this, and if not, it's all right. But what is it like from your perspective to actively fire your weapon against the enemy for the first time?
You're ready. You've been through enough training. You're ready. This a lot of adrenaline going through your body. All you do is respond based on your training. That's all you think about. You don't think about anything else. You don't hesitate. You don't think about moralities. You think your training kicks in, and you go into sometimes you go into autopilot.
Well, and with that autopilot kick in, and especially for your position of being on 881 South, being surrounded, the stakes are high. Because if you don't do your job in itself, if you don't do what you're trained to do as a rifleman, you're letting down the Marines beside you. You're letting down the company, but also you could literally lose your life in itself if you don't do what you're supposed to do.
At any one moment. So you better stay on your toes.
And from that perspective in itself, with the Marines around you in India Company, and of course, from your point of view, when the fighting breaks out, what is a firefight like? That first firefight you partake in from your perspective? What is the sounds in itself? What visuals do you have?
Well, it's uh, it's hard to describe because it's a mixture of emotions and feelings. Uh, it creates a lot of excitement. There's a lot of adrenaline flowing. While at the same time you're scared, you don't know what size force you got directly in front of you, who's coming up. Um, but you're excited and you respond based on your training. Uh, but it's not all negative excitement. You sort of on a high initially, especially initially, that all of this fireworks are going on around you, and that most of it is going out rather than coming in.
Well, and with that too, I know a lot of Marines that I've talked to have said something very similar along those same lines. Is it's a type of adrenaline and a high that you can't find anywhere else, especially in the heat of those firefights when the intensity starts to increase. So, is that drains after the firefight? How do you feel after that first firefight? Are you exhausted physically?
You are physically exhausted. You're glad to be alive. You're happy that you were able to beat them back. But then you just get engaged in conversations with all of your teammates, the team and the squad, uh, and life goes on. You don't drool on it. You don't have second thoughts. You just get ready for the next one.
Well, and being that you're, of course, a rifleman with an India company in itself and in second platoon, for your M16, were you taught to fire, or were you told to fire those on semi-automatic or fully automatic?
That's a problem that that I faced later when I was a squad leader or a platoon sergeant. And by that I mean the tendency, there's so much adrenaline going through your body. The tendency was for everybody, not just the designated AR, automatic rifleman, but for everybody to automatically put that on automatic and fire away. And what they would do is just go through 500 rounds of ammo in 10 minutes. So you we carry on the average we carry 28 magazines with us, 20 round magazines. We had a couple of hundred rounds in our packs, but it was easy to go through all of that ammo in a short time unless you really push discipline in the squads and in the platoon to uh, we didn't have a select fire at that time. It was all either fire or fully automatic. You know, it's safe, fire, and automatic. So, but there was a tendency, especially for the young troops, to just put it on automatic and go through all their ammo and just be in a daze, hypnotized uh, to the moment and go through all the ammo.
Well, and when you speak of those young Marines tending to want to blow through that in itself and the excitement, that is where your young NCOs step into those leadership positions of controlling them, of reminding them of their training and their discipline. That's where your young fire team leader or your squad leader gets to shine, set that example, but also in itself, they get to show the leadership skills that they have earned with their time in country.
Well, absolutely. With the exception of that, most of those team leaders, uh, just maybe a lance corporal who's got 1 month time in gray on you. The squad leader may be another lance corporal or corporal who's got 2 months on the Marine Corps on you. So we're not talking about a great separation of experience or rank. And yes, when you stepped up to the plate, you did the best you could with the experience and knowledge that you had.
Well, and with that being said, Phil, it's what the Marine Corps has trained you to do is that when you're asked to step up to the plate, you do what's asked of you. You do what you've been trained to do. You pick up from those around you, but you do the job that has to be done.
Absolutely. That's why during my whole time in the Marine Corps and since, that's why I was always convinced, and I'm now and still now convinced that fighting against most militaries of the world, we will win the fight because of the uh, if the senior person happen if the senior person in the company happens to be a lance corporal, then that lance corporal is now the company commander, and we're taught from day one that as soon as you need it and that step up, you're gonna step in and you're gonna do the job. Um, Most other militaries have a different philosophy and a different indoctrination. The next if all of the officers are shot, then most senior NCO or staff NCO is not going to necessarily step in. They're not taught to make that transition. We are.
Well, and I think when you look back into the Marine Corps history and you look into some of the names that people do remember about Marines, a lot of those names that come up, they're not officers. Those were enlisted Marines that stepped up to a plate and did the job that was asked of them and continued to do that job until A, they fell from their wounds, or B, they eventually made it through in itself, and we now know their story, vice versa. But it's always been the enlisted Marine with a rifle.
Absolutely. Good training, good discipline. You continue that discipline in a good platoon or a good company, and that's how you bring most of your people back alive.
And that's a statement that I can't comment on simply because of how well said it is. But to end out this interview in itself, I always do this with my Vietnam veterans. There are two questions I always ask at the end of the first segment. So, question number one, we've talked about it a little bit, but with your time in Vietnam and your time in country, what was your favorite sea rat?
Well, actually, unlike many of my compadres, I like most of the sea rats. I love the ham and eggs, and some people the beefsteak and potatoes. A lot of people didn't like, but if you put some hot sauce with it, it would be great. I enjoy getting my pound cake and then taking my cocoa and making it into a nice thick chocolate paste and put it on top of my hot cake, and then I would be in dreamland eating that. So you took what you had. Most of us make the best of it. We had hot sauce sent to a lot of our Marines in on the hill that they got in the mail packages, and then they would share it with us, and we would change the whole meal.
The amount of books and the amount of Marines I've talked to that mention the aspect of hot sauce, it is a life-changing experience when you're out there in the field and you can add a dabble of hot sauce into a sea ration.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, just like one time we had uh, we had a helo with an external pallet going up to A61 Alpha. Okay, uh, I think A Company 126 was there, and he was taking so much fire that he had to divert from A61, came over A81, and release the pallets. So we all got melted ice cream, and it was the best ice cream I ever had to that point. And since it felt so good, and when you read the part of my quote on the siege on the sea, siege in the clouds by Eric Hamill, I'm talking about enjoying melted ice cream that was delivered by a CH-46 because he couldn't get to A61.
And some very fortunate Marines on 881 South got to enjoy melted ice cream for the day.
Absolutely. And when things like that happen with beer, you know, hot beer or anything else, you enjoy the moment like you've never enjoyed it before because there might not be another moment.
And so when it comes to a situation like that with ice cream or with a hot beer, you savor it. You take your time and
You,
enjoy every last drop.
but you savor it in a way that the average person probably could not understand. You know that your moment there is probably temporary. And you know that deep inside your head, you know that. So you're going to take advantage and enjoy every moment you can between now and then, whether it was a second later or it never happens there.
Well, and with that statement there of knowing that it's temporary in itself, but also taking in every ounce of it, especially on 881 South and throughout the siege of Khe Sanh, you've got to take the small moral victories, the small emotional victories like that for yourself as a human.
Oh, absolutely.
And for this last question here, Phil, and then I won't take up too much of your time. With a lot of the photographs that if people look at of Marines in 66, 67, and 68, a lot of people can find Marines putting some graffiti or writing on their helmets or flak jacket. With your time in country, did you do any of that?
Oh, I probably wrote something that I saw on Stars and Stripes, or I saw somewhere or on the back of somebody. I probably wrote one or two items, but it I really did not do a lot of that during my whole time in Vietnam.
Well, and thinking of that too in itself, is there anything personal that you carried that perhaps a family member or someone from back home had mailed to you that you kept for perhaps a good luck charm or anything to remind you of home?
Oh, I had a necklace that I wore with a cross that my girlfriend had given to me. Uh, Later on, after Khe Sanh, that necklace was shot off my neck.
Wow.
Yeah, it didn't. It hit the necklace. It cut the necklace, but it didn't. I was not physically affected. Oh, okay, I got running low on charge. Okay.
But thinking of that, I mean, you could argue that divine intervention. You could argue that the bullet just didn't have your name on it. There's a thousand different arguments you could make there, but it's a story that also has been heard of little events like that where a necklace perhaps saved your life.
Well, yeah, but in my case, I'm gonna have to say there was divine intervention because I've experienced over 20 of those.
Wow.
Okay. During Operation Mid River, when I was a platoon sergeant, standing right in front of a machine gun try to take me out, and I was standing up, and I got a law, and I was able to lob that rocket inside the aperture of that bunker that was maybe 70 yards away. A law is not a precision weapon. I just got lucky, and I was able to stop the law and the carnage to the company. So, but yeah, it those there was no way that I can sit here and say there was no divine intervention. In I had several of those incidents. There was no way I can sit here and say there's no such thing as divine intervention.
Uh, it's beautifully said, Phil. And as we continue our segments of interviews, I honestly look forward to hearing about your experience with that in itself, and as I assume, how it's brought you closer to your faith with each of those experiences.
Absolutely.
Well, Phil, I know it's getting late for you. It's 9:30 here my time, but the way that I always end my interviews with every single veteran, whether it's the first one we do or we ever reach the segment of our last one, I always like to say that sincerely from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your service and welcome home, Marine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I appreciate your sentiments and I enjoyed the interview.